Hello again, everybody. Our special guest today on My Faith with Homer and Pip is Andrew Lunetta. He has an undergraduate degree from Lemoyne College, a graduate degree from Syracuse University. But he says he learns most of what he knows, at least to some degree, from some of his best friends who happen to be homeless in Syracuse. With that as an introduction, Tom Pippins, along with our marvelous producer, Brent Young, and Steve the Homer True had the vision for My Faith with Homer and Pip. Andrew, Homer always tees it up first because he hits it longer and straighter. Take it away, Homer.
Well, I could say, tell me about your faith, but now you give me this other intro. I want to know more. So take us wherever you want to take us, starting with what Pip or Tommy just talked about.
Yeah, sure. I'd happy to share about a tiny home for good, how we got into it. But hey, thank you for the invite to speak a bit about my past and our work, and just to get the mission of a tiny home for good out to more and more people. That's what we're about. So I started a tiny home for good back in 2014, but the story of it starts well before that. When I started at Lemoyne in 2008, I immediately began working at one of the shelters in the city. It's a shelter for men, 115 beds, super bare bones, nothing more than literally like a gym floor and 115 cots. And they welcome guys in any condition. And for some reason, I couldn't stop going back to that place. You know, I would go as a volunteer, and just then eventually they had so much staff turnover, they hired me on staff. So then I started working nights and just met more and more guys in situations radically different from ones that I had grown up in. Facing issues that I had never really, one, faced myself, or two, had even considered in a city like Syracuse. So, got to know these people more and more, met them as they moved out of the shelter, moved back to the shelter, moved out of the shelter back, lots of transition. And I was finishing up a grad program at Syracuse University in 2014 and realized that through these relationships I had built, I had come up with an idea. And the idea was very simple. It was to build small houses for the men in the shelter system. Their own house, everything they need right there, and to then rent it to them at an affordable rate. So in 2014, I founded a tiny home for good, and it's been an adventure since then, which I hope we can get more into.
Back to why. Why did this touch you the way that it did?
Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my folks. So my father was a Catholic priest here in the Diocese of Syracuse for 5 years. Served at St. John the Baptist on the north side. Was the fire chaplain, super involved, but realized he wanted a family. So he left the priesthood and that was his side. My mom's side discerned becoming a nun for many, many years after college, and eventually became the director of a local homeless shelter here in the city. And my folks met when my dad was doing some volunteer electrical work for the shelter. And so I say that to say that the seeds were sowed a long time ago. What was regular in my family, taking care of people and just saying hi to people who were very different from myself, was alive and well without me even realizing it. So when finally, I left high school, I spent a year doing an AmeriCorps program, really trying to get my feet under me. And when I was left to make my own decisions, I just felt drawn to those things that my folks had been teaching me all along without even realizing. So when I saw the shelter for the first time and walked into this dingy, smelly place that had people in a spot that was very different from my own, there's just those seeds of what my folks had planted a long time ago that started sprouting. And that's the why, man. That's the why. And then the what has continued from that is the relationships that I built with every single one of our tenants and all of our potential tenants.
I can't wait to hear the answer to this about your faith. Your dad's there's nobody will ever ask who has the life experience in terms of your parents as you. It's part of who I want to say who you are. So your faith from a young child, and every story, I'm always curious of when it becomes your faith, not your parents' faith, but from, I don't know, I want to ask age 2 or 3, or them
Yeah,
telling you their story.
yeah, you know
What?
what's I mean, so sure, my folks when they were younger before having me were faith was a central component to both their lives. You know, they were practicing Catholics. Um, but as my brother and I, as we grew up, it wasn't something that my parents, you know, we went to church, of course, but it wasn't something that my parents required. What I am so thankful for is their support of me, but also their like flexibility and this sense of like, look, we brought him into this world, teaching him all these like skills and the kind of tactics to navigate working with people who aren't quite like you. Go out and use them. So my faith, I think, really developed out of that love from my folks and a freedom to really express it as the way that I saw fit. And that expressed itself as I started making decisions for myself, as I started going to the shelter every single night and realizing that this is where I felt most called to. This is where I felt most interested. And I guess you can use the word faith. It just grew as my sense of self got stronger here in Syracuse, what I was really meant to do here. And I would say with each day, as I've met more people and recognized my impact on their lives and their impact on mine, it's fortified that kind of my place here.
There are no correct answers on this show. I don't know if Tommy told you that. Do you go to church? How do you view your relationship to God? Do you pray? When do you feel close to God? How does it all fit into a life that I would say, if Mother Teresa was alive, she'd say, I don't need any of those answers. I just want to hug you.
Yeah, I think Mother Teresa said it better than I could. But I don't go to church. I don't pray. When I say like, do I feel closest to God? I can very clearly say when I feel most at peace with myself and when I feel like I'm on the right path. If that's, some people would likely describe that as closest to God. I just describe that as following the path that's been set up for me from maybe before I was even born. And I can identify that closest is when I'm in deep relationship with the men who live at the shelter and then who kind of transition into living at our houses. I know that the work that I'm doing, the long hours I'm working, and those times when I just get to sit down and have coffee or hear about a guy's struggles, like right next to him, provide an ear that they don't have before, is when I feel most in line with what I'm supposed to be doing. And for that's the closest as what I can, I think, describe to the question you're asking.
I would think so many people feel the way you do about those that you help, but not everybody does it.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would agree with that. I think a lot of people I think a lot of people are intimidated. I think a lot of and that is a fair assessment. Like the stories you see about homelessness are either the panhandlers on the side of the road or the stories in like the local paper about the overdoses or the problems surrounding homelessness. Whereas in reality, like the majority are people who might be suffering from mental illness who really need a lot more help than they're being provided with at the time, or are just people who are down on their luck and can't afford even the most affordable housing here in the city. And you don't hear that story often. You don't get to know like the stories behind the men and the women who are living every single day in the shelter. I was lucky to be privy to those stories, to have folks who made sure I knew those stories. But no, I'd say the vast majority of people in the States are not aware and hear the word homeless and it scares them. So I would say those in the homeless service field can feel that way, but that is a very small percentage of who we surround ourselves with every day.
What do you want to tell people the most because of what you've learned about the homeless in any way? If you could have the entire world listening to and you've got 30 seconds to say, people, you need to know this more than anything else. That
I don't even want to say it that way. Like those who are facing homelessness are no different than me or any of the other people on this call right now, and can be just as good neighbors or just as bad neighbors, frankly, as those who have been stably housed for their entire lives. Homelessness is homelessness is a symptom of poverty, right? Like, you don't say someone is cold, you say someone has a cold. You know what I mean? When you say someone's homeless, you're defining them. No, that someone's just temporarily experiencing homelessness for a set amount of time because perhaps they don't have the money to afford the housing, or the mental illness that they're suffering is too strong for them to be provided with adequate housing. So I know that was longer than 30 seconds, but just to make it totally clear that those facing homelessness are not at all different from me. I just was fortunate enough to have two parents who loved me, who raised me in a way that allowed me to be autonomous and do what I want to do.
No, I need to make it clear to you. No, we're not all like you. Okay,
Yeah.
we're just not. But now my question is, tell us a story, because like I say homeless and the big, no, it's people, it's individuals that you've met, and tell us one that will help us understand.
Yeah, well, maybe I can back it up to like a bad story, right? So when we first started, when I first started Tiny Home for Good, both the city of Syracuse and the county of Onondaga, where the city resides, pledged to donate us some vacant land to build the houses on, provided that I get neighborhood support. Everyone knows how this is going to go. So every not-for-profit that has ever existed has dealt with the acronym NIMBY, not in my backyard. We're no different. So I had to go and talk to neighbors about what we wanted to do. And I started those conversations by saying, we're going to rent these houses to homeless people. Like, I use that same exact language that everyone kind of come to expect. And that's exactly where their heads went. Their heads went exactly to the people panhandling or those, those stories of overdoses and danger at the shelter, all those different things. And it wasn't until I started changing my language to how I just described it, people experiencing homelessness brought certain individuals that be living in our houses to some of these community meetings and knocking on doors with those same people, that things started to change. People started recognizing that, like, okay, it's not this like big overarching label of a person. It's like a person who's standing next to this young white kid explaining what's going to happen. And this guy next to him is the person who's going to be living in that house. It changed the tone dramatically. And it changed the tone to the fact that we were able to start acquiring properties, because that's how I started framing our organization. So there was that really hard stretch of trying to find that property. And then I have a ton of what I would say success stories. It's not all success, for sure. As I said, we're working with people who are difficult to house, who have years of diagnosed and undiagnosed mental illness. But I would argue that most of our tenants have done better once moving into our houses.
And the concept of the small house, separating them individually, I'd wonder if being alone is good, or does alone mean with not just themselves, maybe a spouse or kids? What's that story?
I mean, so when I was at the shelter, I would ask people why they came back, because they would find housing, right? They would find a place to live and they would move out of the shelter. And then in a matter of weeks, come back to the shelter and ask, like, why the hell are you back here? Like, you just got your own place. You did it. You got it out. And the vast majority of the time, they would say they couldn't stand their roommate, right? They would be housed through the shelter with another guy who was at the shelter prior. Both of them may have been dealing with mental illness. Both of them may have been dealing with a drug or alcohol addiction. And those things just compound when there's two people facing those same things. So I was told over and over that roommate situations just don't work. And everyone in the homeless service field recognizes that too. So that was like the number one thing, that we're going to build something that's just for that adult, that individual. They have their own place. It's small, affordable, dignified, but it's their own. And I think that has been the number one reason for our success so far, why we've been able to amass years of tenancy for men and women who haven't had a safe place to live in decades, because of that sense of freedom, their own place.
I also believe, not just because it's part of who I am, but I believe a faith is often a part of the people who change, the people who survive. I would say that if I was an atheist, because I'm an accountant, actually, before I got in radio. How much accuracy, if any, of that is true? Or how accurate is that?
So here's what I think is some of the key factors for our tenants. I think that one, they have their own place, but two, they have access to a community. It could be a faith community. It could be a exercise program that a bunch of our tenants take part in 3 times a week. It could be a church right around the corner from them. But I think that that is of utmost importance. They, one, have their own place they can go back to at the end of the day that's just theirs, but two, have some place during the day where they're meeting other people, right? Where they're not alone, where they're able to like say, yep, these are my friends, and I know that these people are going to be here at these days during the week. And we're thankful that here in Syracuse, we have a lot of programming for individuals facing homelessness. We don't have the affordable housing that's necessary to keep everyone off the streets, but we have some really, really good innovative programming that I think a lot of our tenants take advantage of and define that as their community. And I see that as being almost as vital as the 4 walls that a tiny home for good is providing.
It seems like every city should do this. Am I missing something? Or if you were in charge of this world in the entire United States, is this where you would say cities should start?
I don't know. I think it's very easy to do it here in Syracuse. I don't mean very easy. It's possible here in Syracuse because of all the vacant land that's on bus routes, that's close to downtown, it's close to services. There's a lot of reasons why it works here. If you were to go to San Francisco, where the cost of a postage stamp of a lot is more than our budget for the last 5 years, a concept like this just isn't possible. So look, in Rust Belt cities, in smaller rural communities, I think this is a terrific model. In places like San Francisco, LA, New York, where the homeless numbers are massive and the amount of space is minimal, no, I think that what has to be focused on there is the construction of more and more affordable housing in neighborhoods, in apartment setups, that it's well managed. I think that's the answer for the bigger cities. But heck, what we're doing here, I think could be replicated in Syracuse-like cities around the country.
Tommy, you did it again. Amazing story, amazing person.
Yeah. Well, you know me, I'm big on the Holy Spirit, and Coach Minch connecting us with Andrew, and it's just fabulous. Andrew, I believe you were quoted as saying in an article I saw that you learn from people who have been homeless. What have they taught a man who has a master's degree? I think you said public administration before we started.
Mm-hmm. So for about 5 years, I opened up my own home to guys coming out of the shelter system, and lived with a number of men over the course of that time, cooking dinner with them, fixing, so just like they were just very close friends, close roommates. And so the tangible stuff, like everyone has faced homelessness for an extended period of time has the ability to not only fix things, right, but figure things out in a way that a young suburban kid like me just never had to kind of navigate. I could just go to Lowe's or just go to the hardware store around the corner and buy like whatever plumbing fitting or new run of electrical wire I needed. Like the kind of resourcefulness that I think homelessness requires or asks upon that person facing it is something that I was just never privy to. So from that like very tangible fixing and handy side of it, I learned a ton from those individuals. But on top of that, I learned way more about the power of community and what that really can do for an individual who may not have ever been offered that before. So for the guys who I lived with, the men and women who are in our houses now, as I said earlier, our ability to build those houses is just half the battle. The other half is providing a friendship, an ear, programming so that those men and women can feel like they're in a place they want to be for a long time. And I just learned that, I wasn't immune to that either. Like I learned that those people were not only my roommates, but my close friends, and that I needed them as much as I feel like they may have needed me.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I'm going to I'll do a poor imitation of Homer, because at one point he'll catch something and go, wait a minute. How many people?
I have a way.
How many people do you know who will live with homeless people like the person next door? Homer, am I in the ballpark on that one with Andrew Lunetta?
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it.
Yeah, you're right. Not a lot though, but also not a lot of people like grew up with two parents who would take us to shelters or have people staying with us for extended time because they knew they didn't have places to stay. Like, I knew the stories of all of the men who had lived with me over those 5 years. I, I mean, I showed a dedicated relationship to them, and it was reciprocated. So, you're right. Right off the jump, I wouldn't have done that. That would have been very ill-advised for me to have done that, or for anyone to really do that. But I was fortunate to have years of relationships with all of those men who have and had lived with me.
When you see
right,
the
now-
progress, let me just real quick. Go ahead, buddy.
Sure.
I'll come back. There's time. Go ahead. You
Okay,
got it.
no, I want to deal with the stupidity of homelessness. I just assume the majority of people are homeless because either drugs, alcohol, or mental illness. That's simple.
I mean, yeah, no, that's a fair assumption, and that is exactly the kind of assumption that can get the world of homeless services like having to fight an uphill battle. Because really, why people are homeless is because they can't afford housing, right? Like whereas San Francisco has just grown to the point where all of the housing, whether it be affordable or not affordable, is being picked up by everyone who's in the tech industry. So the only thing left is the streets. Where here in Syracuse, there's not an entity out there that is renting at the affordable rate for someone living on public assistance. So the only option is to get a roommate. And, as I discussed prior, roommates don't work for adults that are messing with those similar things. So yes, while mental health challenges, substance abuse issues is a significant problem for those facing homelessness, it's not the reason why individuals are homeless. The reason why individuals are homeless is because they cannot afford housing. The vast majority of people who are homeless would take a key to a place if they could afford it in a heartbeat. My point in saying that is that some of our tenants are still using alcohol regularly, certainly have mental illness, but they're safely housed. They're not a burden on society. They still have a community that they love and that love them. They still face those issues, but they can afford the housing that they're in now, so they're not homeless anymore. The problem is that there's just not that affordable housing out there that is ready and accessible to so many of those who are on the streets.
No, wait a minute. Now, I mean, I know this is what people think, like the person who's out there asking for $1 on the streets. So you give that person a home, they're not going to be out on the streets asking for $1, or they're going to be able to survive if they find a place that they can afford.
Yeah, I would argue that most panhandlers, I wouldn't say that. In Syracuse, I know this, that most panhandlers do have a place to live, and that they're just, preying on the good graces of those who, go by, and they'll use that $1 to go buy a beer. Sure. Okay. That is a minute fraction of those who are facing homelessness, right? They're just way more prevalent because you pass by them every single day. You pass by the same person at the same intersection every single day. And you're like, holy shit, there are so many people facing homelessness here in the city of Syracuse right now. Look at that panhandler. But it's the same person every single day. That is a minute fraction. Those three people are a minute fraction of the 1,200 people who face homelessness in Syracuse on a given day. So I get it, like that panhandler discussion. It definitely is another issue for the homeless service field because it makes our job a whole lot harder. But if I could just share, like, that is a tiny, tiny fraction of those facing homelessness. Many of them aren't even facing homelessness. They're just lying. They're just lying, and sure, they deserve love and care as well. But I think with a little bit more carefulness.
So should I give them money?
It's up to you. As long as you're okay with that money leaving your pocket and going to whatever that particular person is going to use it for. What I would argue, and I'm thankful that I know the names of most of the people that are panhandling like already, so I can, I don't know, I can laugh about it a whole lot more and know that if I give them $1, I know exactly what it's going to. I would encourage people when they stop just to say hello. My name's Andrew. How are you? What's your name? Because you're certainly going to see them again. It's almost guaranteed if you're living in a city as small as Syracuse, you're going to see that same panhandler again. And I just think that that's a really neat opportunity to learn more about them. And, you know, sure, you might not give them $1, but you're putting a smile on their face. And I don't know, they put a smile on my face if I stop and say hi. Whatever. It's fitting that other need that I talk about, that community need that I think is also, like affordable housing, drastically overlooked for those facing homelessness.
Tommy, take it away. Sorry to interrupt.
No, this is all good. I know where you're going. I know when to be quiet, Andrew, because he'll bring out some great stuff, and you're a marvelous guest. I see so much passion in you, Andrew Lunetta, as you talk about what I would respectfully call a mission. When you see these people starting to feel their dignity and their self-worth as human beings, what does this do for you?
Yeah, you know what's kind of neat about the work is that there's never, it's the long game. There's never this like light switch that goes. There's never this like a tenant moves in and all of a sudden they're employed and then they're reconnecting with their children and they're saving money and then they move out of our house. That never happens. It's this like really slow progression. This like this slow progression. And what I value most about our work is the consistency at which we've kind of done our care for our tenants. So I can answer that question really well now, you know, because we have years of tenancy amassed with some of our men, and I can really only answer that question thanks to that experience. And the way I answer that question is that I am so proud of the work of my board of directors to raise money to make this thing happen, of our volunteers and of our staff to put these houses together, and of our tenants who are really doing what they're supposed to. You know, they're getting into their houses, and after years of kind of ups and downs, you can look back and say like, wow, Dolphus couldn't take his medication, never had a place to stay for the last 10 years, and now he's been with us for almost 6 years now. Like, that's a miracle. Like, that is a straight up miracle. And while I wouldn't be able to say that in the day, like I'd be like, oh my God, he just called me freaking out like about something or other. I can say that now with years of experience. So I think the way to sum that up is just a tiny home for good has been remarkably consistent with a population that typically is transient and where consistency is almost the last word you would use to describe them. That's a success. Yeah, that is our biggest asset.
Earlier, when Homer questioned you, talked about, I hope we can get into this because I want to tell people more about what's going on. I'm sure we've covered a lot, but you tell people what you want them to know here. Please, Andrew.
Yeah, I think that to really hammer home that what is keeping the vast majority of individuals homeless is the fact that there's just not enough affordable, appropriate housing for the men and women out there. Sure, there's mental illness, there's drug and alcohol addiction, but those things might always exist in their lives. But the way to better combat that is with housing. You can't expect someone to overcome an addiction when they're living in a shelter 2 feet away from 114 other men who were facing that same addiction. I think housing is the very first thing, and then you can start overcoming those other barriers. I just think that makes everyone's job in the homeless service world easier when that's kind of understood by the general population, by policymakers, and by funders.
I'm sure you've bent some ears here sharing. And if those out there who are within the sound of our voices, Andrew, are interested in trying to come up beside you in some way, shape, or form, financially, otherwise, would you have an email or something that you're comfortable sharing, please?
Oh, yeah. We have a really active web presence with almost daily shares of what's going on at a tiny home for good. And there's also a way to donate through our website at atinyhomeforgood.org. Also, my contact's in there, so anyone who has further questions about our work, I am routinely fielding questions from communities around the country who are interested in doing this kind of stuff. So have a pretty good game plan for places that are interested. So yeah, all of that can be found at our website, though.
A tiny home for good, but I think it's like a mansion, Andrew. It really is incredible. I mean that in the greatest way. Homer, anything else from you?
Yeah, I have a new nickname for him, 60 Minutes. He should be on 60 Minutes. Why has he not been on 60 Minutes? We have all these different shows about tiny homes, right? They're all over the place.
There are a lot of tiny home shows out there. Yep, yep. I don't love them. I didn't start this because I was interested in tiny homes or even in design or architecture. It just happened to be a good model for good housing for men and women.
And I don't know why it isn't, why I don't know this. Tommy didn't know this. How do people not know the things that you've said? And it appears to me you have no interest in like promoting yourself, promoting that. Is that accurate?
Much to the much to the frustration of my board of directors, I'm not. It's not in my wheelhouse. It's not my skill set. And when I do kind of do these kind of talks, I have to psych myself up to do them. But I'm getting better at it, recognizing that people have to hear more about our story if they want to give. I have to ask also if people are going to give. So I don't. My hope is in the near future we'll have a bigger team to be able to share more of our stories. You know, write more grants, call 60 Minutes and say, hey, get this kid on there. But I'm not going to do that. It's just not my charisma.
Well, Homer might. You never know.
Oh, okay, man. Yeah, Homer.
My follow-up isn't real strong. I would assume your parents are so incredibly proud of you.
Yeah, I think so. A thing that I can appreciate in my father now that I couldn't in the past was his like push, his always pushing. So it wasn't until recently that he really started telling me that he was really proud of me, which made me think that he absolutely is. You know, he's always pushing me to do better. And it hasn't been until recent that I've really started been hearing that. And this makes me feel really, really good. My mom has always been so supportive and again, wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. I'd like to hammer that home too, just how supportive they were. Yeah, I'm so lucky. So fortunate.
And lastly, you appear the person who we could meet in 50 years and you'll be doing exactly the same thing. And I don't know if that's a fair question or it's just you love doing this. Is that the best way to put it?
Yeah, I'm in a cool spot. You know, I get to build. I get to work with my hands every day. Probably a quarter to a half of my day is spent with my tool belt on, actually doing the construction, and then get to spend the rest of the day either with the men and women who I'm building this for, or behind a computer talking about the work or raising money for the work. And that's because I built it that way. You know, we're still small, so I can do that. It can afford me the opportunity to do that. As we grow, more of my time is going to be spent on the latter half, raising the money and doing more of the computer stuff. Then I might jump ship, but right now I'm in that sweet spot.
Why do you need more money?
Yeah, I mean, for the exact reason I've talked about the whole time, the reason why men and women are homeless is because of a lack of affordable housing. The Tiny Home for Good is providing at a very affordable rate, not only to construct, but to rent afterwards, housing that is hyper appropriate for those particular people facing homelessness. If we want to end homelessness, we need to look at innovative programming, and a Tiny Home for Good happens to be one of those.
So if you had more money, you could build more of these homes?
Oh, yeah. So for some context, we build our houses for $42,000. Each house, $42,000, connected to utilities, connected to sewer, all of that. That sounds like a lot of money up front, but in just 3 years, we save the taxpayers that amount of money because of homelessness and how much it costs shelters, how much it costs a typical ER visit. Any individual facing homelessness costs the taxpayers a whole lot more money than what we can build our houses for. So, you know, hammering that home too is something that I'm getting better and better at. But yeah, we could end homelessness for someone with just $42,000. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're paying a whole lot more for that particular person in the long run if they stay homeless.
No, it doesn't at all. We can raise $42,000 for you in a day, Tommy and I. My question is, if you had $4 million, could you start the process of 100 homes, given that you know there are places where you could build them? That was my question. If there clearly a need for 100 homes, right? There's no argument.
Oh, sure. With $4 million, we would be on the precipice of ending homelessness here in Syracuse.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, there will always be, don't get me wrong, there will always be the need for emergency shelter, right? There will always be someone who got kicked out of their house or can't afford rent for a particular month, and they'll need to be that emergency shelter. But it should not be a long-term residence like it has been already. Right now, an emergency shelter should be a quick 30-day stay, and then you're back on your feet to that affordable housing. But we can't do that. With $4 million, we would, man, yeah. The reason why I don't go down that road too much is just because I don't have the team around me to be able to raise that stuff and make that happen. But hey, if I got a little podcast with y'all, maybe.
Well, I think as we come to a close here, Andrew, I know you've got an appointment coming up in about 20 minutes. It has been a blessing to meet you. You're an incredible gentleman. And, you know, God is love, and you are loving these people, and I respect that. And I would very humbly submit that you credit your parents. These people of faith are probably praying for you and praying for your mission, your ministry, and that ain't a bad thing either, right? We'll take that any day.
No, I'll take it. Yeah,
Yeah.
take it to the bank. Yeah.
Continue shining and making a difference in the fine city of Syracuse, New York. I'm honored to say that I grew up in this area because of the work that you're doing. So my faith with Homer and Pip, our marvelous producer, Brent Young, really, really appreciate you so much. Thoughts and prayers to you and what you do, Andrew. And also, I think it'd be appropriate just to let Coach Minch, who, again, Homer, I've known him for about 60 years, I think. He connected us with Andrew. You have a question or a comment from Andrew, for Andrew, and then we'll let it go.
Well, I'm just really proud of this kid from the start. He wanted to do this when he came in his interview for Lemoyne, but I think it's important. How old are you, Andrew?
31. I'm 31 now.
And you've been in this field since you were?
Since I guess 2008, since I got to Lemoyne. You know, the very first day at Lemoyne, I went down to the Samaritan Center, which was a soup kitchen here in the city, and just was blown away. She's like, I want more of this. I want to know how to do more of this. And Lemoyne, I mean, the wonderful thing about Lemoyne and the small size is that teachers could recognize that they had a student who was doing something different. And because of what Lemoyne is, they allowed me to, right? So like I could tailor my classes to it. It was wonderful.
Right, that Jesuit thing gets you going. The last thing I want you to tell the folks about, I loved what you did with the bicycles.
Oh, yeah.
How about that? Now, you were in college when that went on.
Yeah. So I started when I was in school, a small organization called Pedal to Possibilities. So hitting that other side, that community side. So every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we had a group bike ride for men and women coming out of the shelter system. And after they joined the bike ride 10 times, they got to keep the bicycle. And it was incredible. It blew up and had just a huge participation rate, not only from men and women from the shelter system, but also from college students and from those in the suburbs, and did a lot to break down those barriers I talked about before, where people are getting to learn about the stories of those facing homelessness and the stories of those from the suburbs going on a bike ride together. And I stopped facilitating that program in 2013, but to this day, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it still continues with the same passion and fervor that I kind of set it on its way. So many of our tenants still go on that bike ride, and it's that other piece of the community that is so important to our work.
Tom, I'm so grateful that you brought that up.
I'm so proud of that kid.
So Homer, we're going to close by saying this edition is My Faith with Homer and Pip, producer Brent Young, and Coach Tom Minch. And we're going to excuse ourselves. Not only does Andrew have to go and you guys, but we've got close to 6 decades of memories to catch up on. God bless you, everybody. We appreciate you so much. So long, Andrew. Thanks again. Lots of gratitude.
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate this. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.